Hey guys, so I'm finally about to start the build of the XBEE-X V2, and I'm using the Fly Tower all-in-one board here, the 40 amp ESC plus the F4 flight controller and video transmitter, so it's going to make for a nice clean build. I did have to use some different screws here to go up through the frame. It has to do with the fact that this frame design uses this screw here on this part of the frame where the flight controller mounts to not only secure the frame but also mount the flight controller. So the screws are too short, and so I had to find some longer screws so that I can get the flight controller on here. I'm using the rubber O-rings here to dampen the vibration, and then I can put the flight controller on top of that with these little metal spacers. I am going to be using the Emax, the new RS2306 motors. These are already, heavily reviewed all over the place, and these are really, really good motors. Looking forward to seeing what the power is like for these. I got I think these are the 2400 kV versions. Let me see, yeah, 2400 kV. The thing that impressed me about these Emax motors is that they came with all this extra hardware, and it was all nicely labeled in these little bags. And you can see here you got some screws, and it's labeled, it says for 4mm arms, and so that's what I'm going to be using. And then they also have little screws for 3mm arms. So it's kind of nice that they have all the screws labeled for you. However, something I did miss to mark was the fact that they did not have long enough motor wires here. And I'll just show you what's going on. Put the motor on here where it's supposed to be, and you can see I don't have enough to reach the solder pads for the motor wires. So I thought this was going to be a really fast build, but now I got to solder on 12 wires to extend these wires here. I think this is 20 gauge, just standard wire here, but I got to probably extend it another inch or so to reach these pads, and that's a fair amount of work compared to just soldering these directly on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and solder on some extensions, solder on my motor wires to the ESCs. And at that point, there's really not much else to do. I got to stick on my flight controller, which already has the video transmitter, and then I'll attach the camera. So I'll come to that point, and then I'll show you what I'm doing with this build. It's actually not that difficult, other than the fact that I got to do all this extra work to extend these motor wires. I don't know why Emax did this, probably because they don't sell any 4-in-1 ESC, so they don't care about that, but they should realize that end users are probably not going to be using Emax ESCs with Emax motors all the time. So I think that's an oversight. Hopefully they've corrected that. Maybe they've done that since I've gotten these motors, but yeah, this is a pain in the butt for these us builders. Just something, a note to Emax: please extend your motor wires. Okay guys, so I got the motors mounted and soldered to the 4-in-1 ESC along with my XT60, and a couple things to be aware of if you're going to be building this out with the parts list that I'm using. I ran the motor wires for the front part here through the side and towards the front like this, because the camera mounting side plates here is going to get in the way. It kind of gets hard to get these wires through, but be aware that you got to make this very flat because of the spacer here. There's a very little space between the 4-in-1 EC and the flight control board. As you can see, that's what you're pretty much allowed. Not much, and it's because there's a connector here that goes to the flight control board. That also causes a problem because on the back I need to run the wires from the rear instead of coming in through the side and in this direction like the front ones. But it's not a problem in the back because there's no camera mount here, so I just have to make sure that I can get it between this standoff and this standoff, and that's fine. So if you guys are wondering why I'm wiring it like this, it's the way, why I'm wiring it this way is because there's not a lot of space and you can't run wires through this part of the board because that's where the connector is that goes to the flight controller. Now I have to say that there's not a lot of soldering to do here as long as you have motors that have long enough wires. This Emax motors didn't have enough wire here, so I had to do this sort of hack job here, which is kind of unfortunate. But as long as you have enough wire, there's only these 12 soldering points to solder, and then the battery connector. But the difficulty level is fairly high. These solder pads are very close together, so you got to be very cautious in the way you solder, and also be mindful of the amount of space you have between the 4-in-1 AC and the flight control board. Okay, so now I've installed the flight controller and just secured it with the screws. It's pretty easy, just plug it into the connector. And then they also supply these connectors for your FPV camera and your receiver. Very, very easy. So once you solder on the motor bars, there's not much soldering left to do, and it's pretty much anything, just plug and play. It's got to mount my camera. There's a little heatsink here for the video transmitter I got to put on, and then I just got to stick the top plate on to my craft and stick on a battery strap, and I'm pretty much done. So yeah, that's pretty easy to build this once you get all the motor bars soldered on. That's pretty much the hardest part, and then the rest is just plugging in a bunch of connectors. So just go ahead and finish up this build, and I will show you the rest. Okay guys, so here it is fully assembled with every component installed. Just put the top plate on. Mounting the Mini Swift was a little bit tricky. I tried to use the supplied side mounting carbon plates, these right here, and just could not get it to work with the other mounting bracket for the Mini Swift. So I decided just to use the smaller mounting bracket for the Mini Swift there, and I had to move the mount forward so I can get that screw in there, but I couldn't get that second screw in to further tighten the angle. So might present a problem later. The tolerance here is really tight. There's very little space back here, so even if I could slide this back, I wouldn't be able to tilt the camera back as much. So it was a little bit tricky getting the camera in there. But I think this mounting is going to be okay. Got the little pigtail there for the video transmitter antenna into this back of this little supporting plate. And it's going into my SMA antenna there. And I opted to go for the micro fly sky receiver. I don't have any issues with this one in terms of range. I can go 200 to 300 meters no problem. I don't usually fly that further than that anyway, so I probably could have put a X6B in here if I got a little creative. There's a little bit of space in the back, but I had a lot of these lying around, so I just decided to go with the FSA-8S. Have a little TPU battery protector on the bottom. I didn't put the props on yet, but we'll get a weight measurement here. So it comes in at over 300 grams without the props, so not as light as I was expecting it to be, probably because these EMAX 2306 motors are a bit heavier than the 2205s that I'm typically flying with. So it should be really good power for this weight, and we'll have to see how it goes. Anyway guys, that's the end of this build video. I will have a flight demo video separately a little bit later. Let me know if you guys have any questions about this build, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.